December 17, 1944, 06 hours, 15 minutes. German artillery position, southern sector of the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The ground trembled as Oberst Friedrich Weber ordered the 22nd concentrated barrage against coordinates where acoustic detection stations reported enemy armor accumulation. 120 tanks according to sound analysis, a critical threat to the flank of the entire offensive. 3 batteries, 18 heavy howitzers, poured 240 shells onto the target zone. Observers radioed back. Secondary explosions detected, possible fuel destruction. Weber marked his tactical map with red ink. Target neutralized. 1 hour later, an American armored column, 300 real tanks, emerged from a sector considered threat-free due to absence of acoustic activity, crushing the German advance within minutes. Weber raced to the neutralized target. He found craters, shattered trees, and among the debris, fragments of military loudspeakers, melted magnetic tapes, destroyed amplifiers. No tanks. There had never been tanks, only recordings. The devastating comprehension hit like shrapnel. For 3 weeks, he had been bombing ghosts while real threats positioned themselves in silence. The false sound had consumed real ammunition, real time, real intelligence, leaving German forces vulnerable to the attack from armor that never made a sound. Picked up a twisted piece of metal still bearing the manufacturer's stamp. RCA Victor, Model SCA, military-grade speaker system. The irony was suffocating. His artillery had been precise, deadly accurate, destroying the exact coordinates his acoustic intelligence had provided. He had done everything correctly. That was precisely why he had lost. For over 2,000 successful bombardments, came to waste 82% of his sector's ammunition on phantom targets, requires stepping back 3 months, to September 19, 1944, when American forces first deployed what they internally called Operation Sonic Deception across the Western Front. The concept was devastatingly simple. If German acoustic intelligence had become sophisticated enough to detect and triangulate tank movements through sound alone, then sound, it itself could become a weapon. Not the sound of real armor, but the perfected illusion of it. IFI-specific vehicle types by engine signature alone. The distinctive growl of a Sherman's Continental radial engine versus the deeper rumble of a Churchill's Bedford Twin 6. Major Hans Kruger, Chief of Acoustic Intelligence for Army Group B, had written in a September tactical memo, "Our acoustic detection network provides advance warning of enemy armor concentrations 24 to 48 hours before visual contact. This advantage is decisive." The memo was correct. It was also the document that sealed the fate of thousands of German soldiers. Was technical. Could you create false tank sounds convincing enough to fool trained German acoustic analysts? October 3rd. The Germans aren't listening to movie theater speakers. They're analyzing raw acoustic data in field conditions. We need to reproduce not just the sound of tanks, but the authentic acoustic signature, proper frequency distribution, realistic reverb based on terrain, correct Doppler shift for movement, and layered complexity of multiple vehicles operating simultaneously. The team spent 6 weeks at Fort Meade, Maryland, recording genuine armored operations. Sherman tanks starting CE. Old engines at dawn. M4 columns moving across various terrain types. Maintenance areas with dozens of vehicles idling. Bridging operations with heavy equipment. They recorded from multiple distances and angles, building a library of over 400 hours of authentic armor acoustics. Bursts of open terrain with correct acoustic propagation. The engineering solution came from Bell Laboratories, custom-built speaker arrays using components from RCA theater systems, mounted in weatherproof enclosures, powered by military-grade amplifiers capable of sustained output at 900 watts. Each speaker unit weighed 63 kilograms and could project low-frequency engine sounds, the deep rumble that traveled farthest and was hardest to fake, at authentic volume levels across distance as exceeding 3 kilometers. Technical Sergeant David Morrison, electrical engineer responsible for the amplifier systems, noted, "We're essentially building the world's most expensive, most powerful, most weather-resistant phonograph system. and instead of playing music, were playing war. Generators, and a four-man crew trained in tactical audio deployment. The crews called themselves the Ghost Army, men who created armies that existed only as sound. Their orders were specific: deploy speaker systems in locations with optimal acoustic propagation, typically elevated positions or areas where terrain would naturally amplify sound. Play recordings during periods when German acoustic monitoring was known to be active, typically evening hours and early morning when battlefield noise was minimal. Vary the content: tank formations assembling, columns moving, maintenance operations, even bridge construction sounds. Create the acoustic signature of major armored concentrations, then maintain that signature for days, making German intelligence believe those positions were genuine threats requiring defensive response. Wrote in his November 12th diary, later captured by Allied forces. Acoustic intelligence reports enemy armor concentrations in 3 separate locations within our defensive zone. Visual reconnaissance impossible due to weather and enemy air superiority. We must assume reports accurate. Have requested reinforcement of positions opposite detected threats. Steiner was doing exactly what his training demanded, responding to intelligence, positioning forces to counter detected enemy concentrations. But the concentrations were recordings. The reinforcements he requested were pulled from sectors where real American armor would attack 3 days later. Muller's report was detailed. Estimate 40 to 50 vehicles, predominantly medium tanks based on engine signatures, stationary or slow movement, consistent with assembly area or staging position. Sound quality indicates diesel engines, likely American Sherman types. Confidence level, high. Weber did what any competent artillery commander would do. He plotted firing solutions. The coordinates placed the target in a small valley with surrounding ridges, terrain that would trap armor and maximize artillery effectiveness. He allocated 32 shells, a relatively modest expenditure given the value of the target, and ordered the bombardment for 0500 hours the following morning. Difficult job done well. His acoustic intelligence had been accurate, his firing calculations precise, his timing optimal. He marked the target as heavily damaged, threat reduced. 3 days later, an American armored column struck his sector from a completely different direction, overrunning 2 defensive positions before his artillery could reposition. The attack came from terrain his acoustic stations had monitored and reported as clear, no enemy activity detected. Weber was baffled. Where had those tanks come from? Why hadn't his acoustic network detected them? It required extraordinary discipline and added hours to movement times, but it rendered them effectively invisible to acoustic detection. Meanwhile, the speaker systems played recordings of tanks that didn't exist, drawing German attention and artillery fire toward empty valleys, while real armor crept into position through sectors the Germans had deemed safe precisely because those sectors were acoustically quiet. He had fired 947 shells in 3 weeks, 73% of his allocated monthly supply, against acoustic targets. His success rate appeared excellent. Forward observers consistently reported impacts in target zones, with frequent secondary explosions. But the tactical impact was zero. Enemy armor continued to appear in unexpected locations, his defensive sectors continued to be overrun, and each time he investigated destroyed enemy positions after the front he found craters and forest damage but rarely any evidence of destroyed tanks. No track marks, no burned-out hulls, no bodies, just craters. Weber began to suspect something was wrong, but the evidence seemed contradictory. His acoustic intelligence was detailed and consistent. His artillery was accurate. Observers reported successful strikes, yet the enemy armor remained undiminished. Ho had worked for Telefunken before the war, approached Weber with an unusual observation. Schmidt had been analyzing acoustic recordings from multiple listening posts when he noticed something strange. The tank sounds from 3 different locations over the past week showed identical acoustic patterns. Not similar, identical. Herr Oberst, Schmidt explained, spreading spectrograms across Weber's field desk. These recordings were made 4 days apart, from stations 7 kilometers from each other, supposedly detecting different enemy units. But look, the engine signatures match exactly. Same sequence of ignition sounds, same pattern of revving, same interference harmonics. It's as if we recorded the same tanks in the same location 3 times, except we didn't. The odds of natural coincidence are essentially zero. Weber studied the spectrograms. He didn't have Schmidt's technical expertise, but even he could see the patterns were impossibly similar. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. Schmidt's expression was grim. "I'm suggesting these aren't tanks we're hearing. I think they're recordings. Commercially available. We use similar equipment for propaganda broadcasts. If the Americans have adapted it for tactical deception..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Weber ordered an immediate review of all acoustic intelligence from the past month, looking specifically for impossible patterns. Same sounds in different locations, detections that didn't correlate with visual sightings, acoustic signatures that appeared and disappeared without the transit sounds of vehicles arriving or departing. Station 4 tracked what appeared to be a tank column moving north to south over 3 hours. But the sound signature showed zero variation in engine stress, as if the tanks were somehow maintaining perfectly constant speed and load regardless of terrain. Real tanks constantly shifted speed, revved engines climbing hills, coasted descending slopes. These acoustic signatures were too perfect. They were recordings, becoming overwhelming. Then he had spent 3 weeks firing over 900 artillery shells at empty forest. Every target neutralized notation in his tactical log was a lie. Every successful strike report from observers was either mistaken or, more likely, accurately describing impacts in target zones that simply contained no actual targets. The secondary explosions observers reported were probably trees exploding from shell impacts, not fuel tanks detonating. He had been precise, disciple, kind and professional, and completely deceived. Fed to vacuum tube amplifiers built to military specifications, fed by professional-grade magnetic tape playback systems. The tape reels themselves were labeled with clinical precision: Sherman column, road movement, dry conditions, tank staging area, assembly phase, maintenance depot, active operations, M4 brigade, tactical movement. Each tape contained hours of recorded armor operations, professional multi-track recordings of such quality that even playing them through the CA featured speakers, at much lower volume than they were designed for, produced sound virtually indistinguishable from real tank operations. A Western Electric cinema-grade units modified for continuous duty operation, the same technology that powered movie theater sound systems, but ruggedized for field conditions. The tape playback system was a Bell & Howell professional unit, the kind used in radio broadcasting stations. Schmidt played one of the tapes at low volume and listened with headphones to isolate details. His technical report was devastating. "This is not amateur work. These recordings were made under professional studio conditions using multiple microphones, mixed with precision attention to spatial positioning and frequency balance, and mastered specifically for long-range propagation. The engineers who created this understood acoustic physics at the highest level. They anticipated our listening equipment and methods. They recorded source material that would generate the exact frequency spectrum and temporal patterns our detection systems would interpret as genuine armor operations. This is acoustic warfare E, executed with the sophistication of a Hollywood production." A heard. Every single analyst identified the recordings as genuine tank operations. 2 correctly identified the vehicle type as Shermans. 1 estimated the number of vehicles with 87% accuracy based solely on the acoustic complexity of the recording. They were experts, and the recordings fooled them completely. And who had provided dozens of detailed acoustic intelligence reports, looked physically stricken. "Herr Oberst, I provided high-confidence assessments on these exact sounds. I staked my professional reputation on those reports. If these are recordings..." He couldn't finish. Weber understood. It wasn't incompetence that had been defeated. It was expertise. The more sophisticated their acoustic analysis became, the more vulnerable they were to sufficiently sophisticated acoustic deception. The Amiri. Icons hadn't overcome German intelligence through force. They had overcome it through superior production values. Detection. Of those 61 missions, Only 9 could be confirmed to have struck actual enemy forces, and those confirmations came from visual observation or prisoner interrogation, not acoustic evidence. The remaining 52 missions, 85%, had likely struck nothing but forest, rock, and speaker systems. 5,642 shells, 18 tons of high explosive, 3 weeks of artillery allocation, wasted. Cost. The invisible cost was strategic positioning. Every time acoustic intelligence reported enemy armor in a location, German forces responded, reinforcing positions opposite the detected threat, repositing reserves to counter potential attacks, diverting reconnaissance assets to monitor the area, and crucially, reducing defensive strength in sectors that appeared acoustically quiet. Major Wilhelm Brandt, Weber's immediate superior, reviewed the disposition of forces across the entire Sector O. Ver the previous 3 weeks. The pattern was unmistakable. German defensive strength had been consistently concentrated opposite acoustic detection zones, while actual American attacks had consistently come through zones that had shown minimal acoustic activity. The sonic deception hadn't just wasted ammunition, it had manipulated the entire German defensive architecture, creating vulnerabilities that American armor then exploited. Ion Weber didn't want but couldn't avoid. His artillery position came under attack by American armor at 0900 hours, over 300 tanks supported by infantry and airstrikes. The attack came from the northwest. Through terrain his acoustic stations had monitored continuously for 2 weeks and consistently reported as clear. Meanwhile, his defensive positions opposite the 3 zones where acoustic intelligence had detected major enemy armor concentrations were overrun within 40 minutes, not by the armor that supposedly occupied those zones, but by infantry units that advanced after Weber's reserves had been pulled away to reinforce against the acoustic threats. The battle was over by 1400 hours. Weber's artillery battalion was destroyed. He and 47 survivors were captured near Malmedy at 1600 hours. Urgent Robert Hayes, the former Hollywood sound mixer who had supervised much of the recording work, conducted Weber's initial interrogation. Hayes explained the operational concept with the casual pride of a craftsman discussing his work. We recorded genuine tank operations under optimal conditions, using professional microphone arrays positioned to capture spatial audio. We mixed those recordings using studio techniques, balancing frequencies to ensure long-range propagation characteristics teached real armor operations in field conditions. We added environmental audio, wind, ground reflection, distance attenuation, so the recordings would sound natural when played through speakers positioned 3 to 4 kilometers from German listening posts. And we deployed them knowing your acoustic intelligence network was sophisticated enough to detect them, but not sophisticated enough to distinguish studio-recorded audio from live operations. E-speaker systems, frequency response from 40 Hz to 15,000 Hz, directional projection with 60-degree horizontal dispersion, maximum output of 123 decibels at 1 meter, sustained power handling of 900 watts. These speakers, Hayes explained, were designed to project sound to the back row of theaters seating 3,000 people. We adapted them to project tank sounds across 3 kilometers of forest. The Germans heard what we wanted the AM to hear, exactly as loud and exactly as convincing as we needed it to be. Weber asked how long the Americans had been employing sonic deception. Hayes consulted captured German tactical logs and made calculations. Based on your first acoustic-directed artillery mission against our speaker positions, I'd say we've been successfully deceiving your network for approximately 11 weeks. During that time, you fired at our ghost tanks roughly 70 times. The speakers weren't cheap. Each unit cost around $800. But considering you expended over 5,000 artillery shells trying to destroy them, I'd say the return on investment was pretty solid. Deception. In response, German forces had expended over 12,000 artillery shells across all sectors where speaker systems were deployed, representing approximately 90 tons of high explosive and a material cost exceeding 3 million Reichsmarks. But the numerical comparison understated the true impact. Artillery shells could be replaced. The strategic positioning errors caused by the deception, reserves moved to wrong sectors, defensive preparations made opposite phantom threats, Recon. Nascent assets wasted monitoring empty forest. Those couldn't be calculated in simple economic terms, but they had directly enabled American armored breakthroughs that shortened the war in the West by weeks. SANTs, impossibly dangerous, and artillery-delivered smoke and fog restricted ground observation. Commanders had become dependent on acoustic detection to provide advance warning of enemy armor movements, and that dependency had been systematically exploited. Oberleutnant Hans Richter, captured near Bastogne, described his unit's experience. "We detected what we believed to be an American armored division, over 200 tanks, assembling 5 kilometers from our positions. We reported the threat to Corps headquarters, requested air reconnaissance, and began preparing defensive positions opposite the suspected attack vector. The air reconnaissance was denied. Weather prevented flights. We waited 4 days for the attack. It never came. Instead, American armor struck our southern flank, which we had weakened to reinforce the north. After capture, American soldiers told us they had been playing tank sounds through loudspeakers. The division we detected didn't exist." Richter's experience was nearly identical to dozens of other German officers captured during the Ardennes offensive and subsequent American advances. 1944, acoustic intelligence represented approximately 40% of our total enemy armor detection capability, with the remainder divided between visual reconnaissance, signals intelligence, and agent reports. We considered acoustic detection highly reliable. Our analysts were trained professionals, the equipment was sophisticated, and the correlation between acoustic detection and subsequent enemy action had been consistent for months. When acoustic intelligence reported major enemy concentrations, we responded with significant force repositioning. In November and December, we made 7 major redeployment decisions based primarily on acoustic intelligence. 4 of those decisions proved catastrophic. We repositioned forces to defend against acoustic threats that never materialized, leaving actual attack vectors weakened. The Americans didn't break through our defenses through superior force alone. They broke through because we defended against armies that existed only as sound, while their real armor attack positions we had stripped of defenders. TED material cost included over 12,000 artillery shells expended against speaker positions, but the operational cost was exponentially higher. Units positioned to defend against phantom threats were unavailable to defend against real attacks. Reconnaissance assets wasted monitoring empty terrain, couldn't monitor genuine threats, and commanders making decisions based on corrupted intelligence made predictably wrong choices. Post-war analysis by military historians, examining captured Germany and documents, interrogation records, and tactical logs from both sides, concluded that sonic deception operations shortened the war in Western Europe by approximately 3 to 5 weeks by accelerating the collapse of German defensive coherence during the crucial winter months of 1944 to 1945. D directed dozens of artillery bombardments, was interviewed by American intelligence officers in February 1945. His testimony revealed the personal devastation of professional betrayal. "I was trained to identify vehicles by sound. I could distinguish a Sherman from a Churchill at 3 kilometers. I could count vehicles in a column by analyzing the temporal spacing of engine sounds. I provided detailed, confident reports used for targeting decisions that killed men and consumed irreplaceable resources. I was certain I was competent, discovering that my expertise had been used against me, that my ability to hear the subtle details of tank operations made me more vulnerable to sufficiently detailed false recordings, was worse than military defeat. It was the defeat of knowledge itself. The Americans didn't need to be better at acoustic analysis than we were. They just needed to be better at acoustic production, and they were. They were so much better that we couldn't tell the difference. S were sound. I followed doctrine exactly, but doctrine was based on the assumption that intelligence was reliable. When intelligence itself became a weapon, when the enemy could make us hear what they wanted us to hear, then correct doctrine applied to false intelligence produced incorrect results guaranteed. The brilliance of the American sonic deception wasn't its technical sophistication, though that was impressive. The brilliance was recognizing that the more we improved our acoustic intelligence, the more we would trust it, and therefore the more damaging false acoustic information would become. They turned our strength into our greatest vulnerability. That's not just tactical innovation, that's understanding war at a philosophical level. Ute understates its impact. Visitors who examine the equipment often remark on how primitive it seems. Vacuum tubes, magnetic tape, horn speakers, technology that would be obsolete within 20 years. But in December 1944, in forests of Belgium and France, those primitive components created illusions sophisticated enough to deceive the most advanced acoustic intelligence network of the war. The speakers played armies that didn't exist. German artillery destroyed those phantom armies with perfect precision. And while that destruction occurred, real armies moved through silence, their approach masked not by stealth technology or electronic countermeasures, but by the simple expedient of making the enemy listen to lies instead of truth. Local Belgian farmers who worked the land called it the American Crater, though few knew the specific history. In the 1980s, a military historian researching sonic deception operations located the site using Weber's captured tactical maps and American deployment records. The crater was still there, partially filled by erosion and vegetation, but unmistakable. In the soil, he found additional fragments, pieces of speaker coils, sections of magnetic tape, shrapnel-punctured amplifier HE housings. He collected several pieces and donated them to the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center. They remain in the collection, cataloged as fragments of sonic deception equipment destroyed by German artillery, December 1944, Ardennes sector. I could be more decisive than defeating their physical forces. The false sound didn't hide real tanks. It created the belief in tanks that didn't exist, and that belief influenced decisions, repositioned forces, consumed resources, and created vulnerabilities that real tanks then exploited. The German artillery that bombarded speaker positions wasn't failing. It was succeeding perfectly at the wrong mission, having been given perfect intelligence about a perfect lie. Study information warfare, psychological operations, and electronic deception. The sonic deception operations of 1944 to 1945 are considered foundational case studies, not because the technology was particularly advanced. By modern standards, it was almost absurdly primitive, but because the operation demonstrated timeless principles. The more sophisticated an intelligent system becomes, the more it relies on the data it collects. The more it relies on that data, the more vulnerable it becomes to data corruption. And the most effective way to defeat a sophisticated enemy isn't always to be stronger, but to make them hear what you want them to hear, see what you want them to see, and believe what you want them to believe. The ghost army that existed only as sound didn't win battles by force. It won battles by making the enemy fight ghosts while reality maneuvered around them unopposed. Classified interviews in the 1970s reflecting on his experience with 3 decades of perspective. The Americans played recordings of tanks. We heard tanks. We responded to tanks. We destroyed the recordings with artillery that could have destroyed real threats. The deception worked because we never questioned whether what we heard was real. We only questioned how to respond to it. That is the essence of perfect deception, making the target so confident in their perception that they never examine the perception itself. I was not defeated by American armor. I was defeated by American audio engineers. And the truly brilliant aspect, I didn't know the difference until it was far too late to matter.